Welcome to Truth and Testimony, the broadcast, where we teach and discuss the Word of God. You'll also hear about world news and how it relates to Bible prophecy, plus interviews and testimonials from men and women of God who have devoted their lives to serving Yeshua, Jesus Christ our Lord. Now, without further ado, let's get to our host, Adrian Scott.
Shalom. This is Truth and Testimony, the broadcast, and I am Adrian Scott. I welcome you all. Thanks for tuning in, checking out the video. We are going to be starting today the first in a series of videos, which I think I'm going to call Hebrew Roots 101. Once again, I've said it previously, there's some great resources out there that will go into much better depth than I am able to. And I would encourage you, if you're at all interested, to learn more, to go look for those resources. But I am confident that I can give at least a good introductory taste of the Hebrew Roots movement, known by many things. Again, I like to just call it biblical believing. And I figured what better place to start, because a lot of the topics that we are going to cover connect to the timing in the year that these things occur. And that timing is designated by the calendar. Now, there are a multitude of different calendars in the history of humanity. I always have, particular memories of the Mayan calendar, which I guess ended in, 2012? And the idea was, for the people that really believed that one, that the world was going to end. And kind of a quick funny story on this one. So we were celebrating New Year's Eve that year, and that had been in a lot of the news was the idea that this Mayan calendar was ending, and according to this calendar, which ended in 2012, that with it ending, so was going to end the world. So here we are, New Year's Eve, we're rolling around to midnight. You hear all the hooting and hollering go off and the fireworks start, and all of a sudden we could hear this one voice out in the distance going, "Yahoo! We're all gonna die!" Yeah. that was our New Year's heading into 2013. So yeah, that's one example of a calendar. The calendar that we use in the Western world today is what they call the Gregorian Calendar. It itself was derived from an earlier version called the Julian Calendar, which was corrected at some point because the calculations in it were off. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But that calendar, the Julian calendar, got updated to the Gregorian calendar. But there were earlier versions of the Julian calendar. And aside from all of that, you also then had the Hebrew calendar. That is what we are going to be talking about today as our introduction to this. And what better way to start that one than to just jump right in with the question, when does a week start according to the Hebrew calendar? And we read in Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their array, and on the seventh day Elohim completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And Elohim blessed the seventh day and set it apart, because on it he rested from all his work which Elohim, or God, in creating had made." So the point of that is to establish that the week is 7 days. 6 days of creation, the seventh day is the day of rest, but that commenced the way that a week works. It's a 7-day cycle, according to the Hebrew reckoning. And the seventh day of that being the Sabbath, which we will talk about in a moment. Actually connected to that, as I'm going to make my case for this one real quick, in Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11, we read, "Remember the Sabbath day, which is the seventh day, to set it apart. 6 days you labor and shall do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of Yud-He Vav-He, your Elohim, You do not do any work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days Yud-He-Vav-He made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. Therefore God blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart. So the point of that is that the 7th day is the Sabbath day. Do we know which day is the 7th day? Well, it's kind of funny because if you look even at our modern Gregorian calendar, what is the first day on the left that you would see on that? It is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and the last day showing the 7th day is Saturday. But whether you take that one or not, the 7th day is Shabbat. And actually in Hebrew, the way they name the days is, funny enough, it's just day 1, day 2, day 3, all the way up to day 6. So the only day that actually has a name is the 7th day, which is the Shabbat. And that one, a point that I wanted to make there is the Sabbath, as observed by the Jewish people, to the best of my knowledge, is the oldest recorded, continuously observed religious day or holiday that exists. And what I have found out is even at the time that they started recording it, so it's the oldest recorded day already, but even at that point, when it was started to be recorded, acknowledgement was made at that time that it was already a long-standing tradition. So it is, once again, the longest continuously observed religious day or holiday in known human history. And in fact, predates that recorded known history. By mouth, by explanation. They say, oh, this is something that was already being done when we started capturing it. So I'm confident in saying that Saturday on our modern calendar is the 7th day and is therefore the Sabbath. That's another one we can expound on later on, but that's basically the first one, that you have a 7-day week. It begins on Sunday, it ends on Saturday, according to the Hebrew calendar. So then we take those weeks and we ask the next question, when does the month start and end? The basic gist of it is, and I have to point out that there is dispute and debate, of course, on everything. This is no exception, on how these things were reckoned, but in the purest biblical sense, the beginning of the month was noted by the sighting of the first sliver of the new moon. So effectively, it's a lunar calendar. When we fast forward a little bit and look down the road, at one point, the Israelites were no longer in their native country and couldn't reckon the time from the location they were supposed to, so a calculated calendar had to be derived. I think we will talk about that a little bit here. Yeah, so I will leave it till we get to that point. But that a calculated calendar was done. And that calendar actually combines the lunar calendar with a solar calendar, and it puts the two together in order to make the calculations. And to be fair, given the circumstances, it's a pretty accurate calendar. I'd actually say in the grand scheme of things, it's more accurate than the Gregorian calendar. But it is not purely a biblical calendar, which is the one I'm trying to follow. I don't really care what the Orthodox have to say about this or what the Christians have to say about that. I need to read it in the Bible. If I read it in the Bible, I'll believe it. And even then, I mean, there's times where it's like, does it really say that? And then I go look up the Hebrew word or the Greek word to try to be certain. And in most cases, it has come back. In fact, I think in just about every case I can think of, it has come back to be accurate. So there may be errors in the Bible, and I think all translations ultimately have a few, but I would also say I don't think there's many. So yeah, first the sighting of the first sliver of the new moon. Now, an interesting note is it is not known whether that first sliver will be visible, because weather patterns can change. It might be overcast, cloudy, And because it is something that needs to be visibly seen. So if you can't see it, then it basically was set up that a second day would be added. So you could see it the second day. What that ultimately ended up meaning is that the biblical month could be 29, because the normal cycle, I think it was like 29.5 or something days, but it would either be 29 or 30 days, depending on whether the sighting of the moon was done on the first day they thought it would happen, or if they had to go to the second day because it was not viewable the first day. So 29 or 30 days is the length of a biblical Hebrew month. Then we get into, and this is opening a bit of a can of worms, when does the year start and end? So the Jewish people have basically two starts of year as I understand it. One, I believe, is more civic, and the other one is the religious or the more biblical. But biblically, the beginning of the year, as noted pretty plainly in the Bible, is when the barley harvest is found to be at a particular stage of ripeness, which is called Aviv, or Abib, depending on how you want to pronounce it, and the first sighting of the sliver of the new moon is made. So things that can happen there: if the new moon is not sighted, add a day. If the barley is not Aviv, if it's not at that stage of ripeness yet, they add an extra month, and this is a month they call Adar Bet. So that's where, this is often where you'll see the discrepancies in timing between the Orthodox Hillel calendar and the straight biblical calendar. The calendar that I tend to follow is one that is called the astronomically and agriculturally corrected biblical Hebrew calendar. There are a lot of people that follow that one. There are a lot of people that don't. Make your choice. That's fine. I have looked at different calendars, and this one comes across to me as the most accurate. So it is the one that I go with. So one question that I kind of came up with as I'm just trying to, fill the topic of this is why is this all important? And really the short answer is because God said so. He created the heavens and the earth. He set the stars in the sky to mark times and seasons. And we read that in Genesis 1:14, and Elohim said, "Let lights come to be in the expanse of the heavens, to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and appointed times, and for days and for years." So as I get into the biblical feasts, which is going to be the sort of continuation of where we're going here, they are also known as the appointed times of God. There's 7 of them, and he's telling us right there that part of the creation, the stars and the alignments in space, are to mark those signs and appointed times, so that when we follow the calendar, when we follow that sighting of the sliver, the first sliver of the new moon, when we do those things, we'll have an accurate rendering of time, and we'll know based on that when the various feast days and appointed times are supposed to occur. So with all of that being said, I would bring up another point, something that is, I think, significant to the rest of this, is because in large part in the Western church, not all churches, but a good chunk of them, the day of rest or the day of communing with God has been done on Sunday, where, again, I make the contention that it should be Saturday. Now, if I'm right, can we find a time when this day of rest changed, and can we find out who changed it? Well, I think we can at least partially answer that question within the scope of my ability. But ultimately, my answer would be the Catholic Church. Now, this always is another can of worms to get into, and it's another hot topic. I first off like to say I do not support the Catholic system. I think there's some very serious problems with that church. Having said that, I think there are some phenomenal people that have a true heart for God that are in the Catholic Church. There are those people in the Pentecostal Church. There's those people in the Baptist Church. You can find those people in any denomination of Christianity anywhere in the world. But I think that they're in a bad system. So when we look back on the history of the Catholic Church, first off, I would point out one observation, that the word Catholic itself apparently means universal. So the idea was that at one point the Roman Empire, or the Roman leader, might have been, no, I think it predated that. Anyways, there was a move to combine political and religious influence. So they made the Emperor of Rome also the spiritual leader, or I think the term was Pontifex Maximus. So he was the emperor and the high priest. And that was to just consolidate power and to kind of bring everyone together under this one folder. When the Roman Empire covered so much land, there was all these different people groups and ethnicities and religions under that. There needed to be some form of coordination and unification. So this universal religion was made. And effectively, the result of this was that the invitation was made to all of these people, hey, come join our church. You can keep doing whatever other religious holidays you've been observing. We're just going to bring it all under this umbrella, and we're going to rename some of these things, but you can keep doing what you were doing. So all of these, what ultimately were pagan religious traditions, were brought into the Catholic Church, were slapped over with a new Christian Catholic title. It said that they were being done for something else. And there we go. We move on from there. Now, my contention on that one is, if this was an abomination to God, if this was pagan and he told us not to do it, which he said many, many times throughout Scripture, if it was that way all those years ago, and with the idea that God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, wouldn't it still be an abomination to him today? It may mean something different to us, but I suspect that it is still, he still sees it the same way, and it still is detestable to him now as it was then. And so to bring all of these things into this church system, it didn't make them any better. It just covered them up and renamed them. But I kind of mentioned the name. One of the big characters that ties into this is Emperor Constantine. Now, I will say right out of the gate, he is often blamed as the source of changing the day of rest from Saturday to Sunday. This may not be directly the case. It is for certain that he was, he was a Mithra worshiper, which is a sun god. So that is Sunday, which is sun god worship day. So he definitely leaned towards that day for everything that he did and that he encouraged others to do. And there were various edicts and stuff that he made really promoting the idea of let's do this on the great and venerable day of the sun, which is Sunday, instead of Saturday. Now, did he directly say the Jewish Sabbath or the biblical Sabbath is changing from this day to that day? Maybe not, but he certainly set the stage for it, even if he didn't. Now, one evidence that can be found goes back to the year 364 AD, and this is from the Council of Laodicea, and one that I'm going to read in particular. There's already things that were going on, so it's a painful part of the history, but the Catholic Church, which really was the church in the first number of years after the time of Yeshua, Jesus, they may not have made things official, but there was a very anti-Jewish movement and presence within the church. This touches on another topic, which we'll probably talk about at some time, but it was there. When you look at different biblical characters and some of the pretty nasty things that were said, This one is not so great itself. It's Canon 29. This is from the Council of Laodicea in 364 AD, and it states, Christians shall not Judaize and be idle on Saturday, but shall work on that day. It's not a day of rest. You work. But the Lord's day they shall especially honor, and as being Christians, shall, if possible, do no work on that day. If, however, they are found Judaizing, they shall be shut out from Christ. You are excommunicated. You are thrown out. And by the way, the Lord's Day is Sunday. So when they say you shall especially honor that, and as being Christians shall, if possible, do no work on that day. So, and if any of us are older, I'm in my early 50s now. I mean, I can recall when I was a child, Sunday really was a day off. Like you were hard pressed to find any businesses that were open. There were probably a few. I can imagine I can think of a few, but that's really changed. Like pretty much everything is just open 7 days a week now. You find some exceptions to that, of course. But when I was a lot younger, it was definitely a lot more prominent. And when I talked to, you know, some older members of my family, my uncles and stuff like that, even more so when they were young. So, you know, it's something that was held for a long time, and we've kind of gotten away from it. But I frankly make that as a statement that we are about, corporally, as humanity on earth, we are about as godly, or godless, sorry, right now as we have ever been. And that's a problem. But that is Canon 29 from the Council of Laodicea in 364 AD. That is not anything to do with Constantine, but they were definitely firming down on different decrees and edicts that Constantine had made previously. So I mentioned that the Julian calendar was changed to the Gregorian calendar. This happened in 1582, primarily to deal with errors in the Julian calculation system that was throwing the dates of Easter off. That was a very important holiday, needed to be kept, and they were getting the wrong timing for it, so they corrected what they were doing, updated the calendar. The dates, when they made this change, because I mentioned, if you look at the Gregorian calendar, the first day that it's showing on that is Sunday, and then you move your way over, and the last day showing on it is Saturday. That the dates of the month changed, but the days of the week and their sequence were unaltered from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar. If you look at your current Gregorian calendar, as I mentioned, the first day, Sunday, seventh day, Saturday, seventh day is the day of rest. And he set that day apart, sanctified it, and told us to set it apart. So when they say, well, you just have a day of rest any day of the week. Well, that doesn't work. Any day of the week was not the seventh day. Only the seventh day is the seventh day. Now, the last thing I wanted to just touch on here is a little bit of difference between the Jewish Orthodox calendar or the traditional calendar that they're using nowadays and the biblical calendar. So it's called the Hillel II calendar, named after Rabbi Hillel II, and it was created as a result of the Jewish expulsion from their homeland. Because, as I mentioned previously, how were things reckoned? Well, it was the sighting of the first sliver of the new moon from the temple or the Temple Mount. And also, to start the year, which was the even bigger deal, was the sighting of the Aviv barley. This is to be done in the country, in Jerusalem, So, in, what was it, AD 70? The temple got destroyed and they were effectively exiled from the country. The dispersion continued after that, so that only a small remnant of Jewish people ever remained. And now there has been what they call Aliyah, which is Jewish people returning to their homeland, but there's still many Jewish people that do not live in Israel. They live in other parts of the world. And at any rate, with being exiled from the country like that, they could no longer mark the time from a purely biblical method. So they required something different, and that was the advent of the Hillel calendar, where it was a combination of a lunar calendar and a solar calendar in order to make the calculations to interpret when each of the days should be. And again, as I mentioned, it's a pretty accurate calendar all said and done. But that Aviv barley thing is a big element that can throw it off, and that's where you can get some noted discrepancies between when the Orthodox Jewish people will observe holidays and when others may observe holidays, particularly Messianics and stuff. But it's a difference between those two calendars. Sometimes they line up pretty close. Other times they can be off by a couple days, and other times it can be off by a full month or more, depending on the barley and the sighting of the first sliver of the new moon. So that calendar was created in the year 359 of the Common Era, as they would say. And, I mean, it goes without saying, it is much more accurate than the Gregorian calendar. So I think, even if you're not following a purely biblical Hebrew calendar, you should be at least following the Hillel calendar. That's just my opinion. Having said that, I mean, I work in a very secular environment that really has nothing to do with that. So our holidays, our everything are based off the Gregorian calendar. It's kind of the one I'm required to function under in where I live and how I do things. But I do absolutely mark and note when the biblical Hebrew calendar and the dates on it are occurring. I mark those feasts that are prescribed by God for us to follow on that calendar. And I'm just kind of, I guess, forced to sort of combine the two, although I do not observe any Western holidays anymore. And that's a whole other one, because it's not like I just willy-nilly toss those things aside. I have some deep, profound, positive memories that connect to those holidays, and I've had to put those aside. And believe me, I've wrestled saying, is it worth it? But it has to be. If this is what I believe, I need to adhere to what I believe, because it's about your heart, right? I would argue, I would make the contention, whether you're right or wrong about something, if you are convinced about it and then act against that belief, you are acting against the Holy Spirit. Because it's effectively an act of rebellion. If you really believe something to that degree and then don't adhere to that, that is rebellious. You're not willing to be corrected and put back on that. You're stiff-necked and you're just walking down that path, which may not be the correct one. So I acknowledge the calendar that I have to live under, but I subscribe to the calendar that I've read about in the Bible, and it is God's reckoning of time. I want to meet him on the days that he has said, come and meet with me. You know, we'll talk about this in more detail, but like 3 of the 4 feasts are actually pilgrimage feasts where you're actually supposed to go to Jerusalem. Now we're in a bit of a different dynamic because we're still in the diaspora, the dispersion, but many of us are just not able to make that trip 3 times a year to go to Israel. So, frankly, one of the things that I'm actually planning on doing, as I do have a trip coming up, which is one of the pilgrimage feasts, is taking a huge amount of video footage, and I'm thinking for the other pilgrimage feasts, if I can't physically go there, I can put it on every TV in the house, and we can pretend we're in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. So that's kind of one of my silly thoughts, and it's marking that it's an observance, it is a remembrance. And that is a lot of the reason for the things that we do, and in particular the feasts. It's not about the literal fulfillment of the way they did it. It's more a remembrance now of what has been fulfilled and a prophetic shadow picture, as Paul says, of good things yet to come. So that's why we follow those things. But there is kind of your biblical Hebrew Roots 101 introduction to a biblical Hebrew calendar. The days of the week, how a month starts, how a year starts. As we talk about the feasts, that's what it's going to be connected to. So I look forward to seeing you in the next video. So like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't like it, share, subscribe, all of those things do help us out and encourage us to keep doing what we're doing. I'll see you in the next video. I wish blessings to all of you in the name of Yeshua Messiah, and Shalom.
You've been listening to Truth and Testimony, the broadcast. If you have a comment, please leave it on the bottom of this video or email us at truthandtestimonymemail@gmail.com. Again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Truth and Testimony, the broadcast, is not affiliated with Truth and Testimony magazine.